everybody. Bon matin tout le monde. Okay, colleagues, I've gavelled in. If I could have everybody's cooperation in getting the meeting started, please. Good morning. Okay, colleagues, we're going to get going here. I'm asking staff and others who are engaged in conversations if we could just keep the noise level down, please. Colleagues, we're continuing our study on fraud, which is now the third meeting that we have had on the topic here at the Industry Committee. Reminder to witness in the room that if your earpiece is plugged in but not on your ear, to please just ensure that it's on the sticker in front of you to protect the health and well-being of our interpreters. Je peux confirmer qu'on a pris tous les tests pour l'audio et visuel aussi.
I confirm that we've all done the necessary AV and sound tests as well.
From the British Columbia Securities Commission, we have Sarah Corrigal-Brown, who's the General Counsel. I do understand, Ms. Corrigal-Brown, that you were very accommodating this morning in the wee hours of the British Columbia morning in accommodating the necessity for us to get all of our tests done. So we just want to thank you off the top for your cooperation in that regard. From Payments Canada, Jude Pinto, who is the Chief Delivery Officer here in the room with us today. And from Plurilock Security, Ian Patterson, who is the Chief Executive Officer. Witnesses, you'll have upwards of 5 minutes each for introductory remarks, at which point we will turn to colleagues around the table for questions and answers. With that, Ms. Corrigal-Brown, I will turn the floor to you for upwards of 5 minutes for your introductory remarks.
Thank you very much. Dear Chair and members of the committee, thank you very much for the invitation to be with you and to contribute to your important study regarding financial fraud and scams in Canada. My name is Sarah Corrigal-Brown, and I'm the General Counsel of the BC Securities Commission, joining you virtually today from Vancouver. The scourge of financial fraud has been around for a long time, but in the past decade, and especially since the pandemic, it has spread and intensified, like a mutated virus that is many times more contagious and virulent than ever before. We are very pleased to see the actions of the federal government is taking to address fraud, including the government's intention to launch a new financial crimes agency. The BC Securities Commission and Canada's securities regulators, who keep watch over the country's investment markets and contribute to the integrity of Canada's financial system, have been on the front lines of this battle. Securities regulators have a mandate to protect investors from fraudulent, manipulative, and misleading practices, and we see the exponential growth of financial fraud as one of the greatest threats to investors today. Prevention and detection of fraud is essential, but combating fraud also requires strong and effective enforcement. Today, I want to talk to you about one aspect of Canadian law that is undermining our enforcement efforts. When fraudsters are located in Canada, securities regulators like the BCSC take formal action through administrative tribunal proceedings. These tribunals, comprised of recognized experts in securities law and bound by rules of procedural fairness, have the power to exclude lawbreakers from the investment market and to impose financial penalties on them. Those penalties sometimes reach into the millions. They are key to deterring further misconduct by the lawbreakers themselves, but they also deter misconduct by others who might be tempted to defraud unsuspecting investors. For those penalties to have deterrent power, however, it is not enough for our tribunals to hand down legal orders. We need to be able to collect sanctions. Otherwise, they are penalties in name only. There are many obstacles that lawbreakers can exploit to block our collection efforts. One of them is a federal law, the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act, or the BIA. The BIA is designed to enable the financial rehabilitation of honest but unfortunate debtors to give them a fresh start, releasing them from their debts upon discharge from bankruptcy. The BIA does this well, and Canada's securities regulators wholeheartedly support that objective. However, the BIA treats the penalties imposed by securities regulators for egregious misconduct the same as consumer debt. This means people who have been penalized for significant market misconduct can have their penalties erased through the bankruptcy process. These are people whose debts result from their own predatory behavior towards other Canadians and who are seeking to avoid paying those debts. When they do this, it undermines Canadian securities regulators' efforts to enforce the law and protect investors from fraud. To pick one example from Alberta, Salishwar Narayan admitted to committing fraud in mortgage financial schemes in which investors lost $4 million. 1 month after the Alberta Securities Commission ordered him to pay a $300,000 administrative penalty, he entered bankruptcy and was discharged from bankruptcy 10 months later. The penalty was erased, and the ASC collected only $6,300 towards Narayan's debt. We believe examples like this undermine confidence in the ability of the Canadian regulatory regime to hold fraudsters accountable for their actions. This undermines the foundation of honesty and fairness that we all expect of Canada's markets. We also believe they fly in the face of the federal government's laudable crackdown on financial crime. There is, however, a fix. The BIA has a list of debts that Parliament has decided should not be extinguished in a bankruptcy. We and all other Canadian securities regulators ask that Parliament add to this list the financial sanctions imposed by Canadian securities regulators for the most egregious types of market misconduct: fraud, market manipulation, and misrepresentation. We have spoken about this request with ISET officials and made submissions to the House Finance Committee and the Department of Finance. The Government of BC and all securities regulators across Canada support this request. It is also supported by a range of organizations, including the investor advocacy group Fair Canada, the Consumer Council of Canada, CFA Societies Canada, and the Canadian Association of Retired Persons. Making this change to the BIA would have no impact on the honest but unfortunate debtors that the BIA aims to serve, and would impose no additional burden on the bankruptcy courts that ably carry out the BIA's crucial mission. But it would reconcile provincial securities law and federal bankruptcy law that in this particular respect are working at cross purposes. It would also serve a more practical imperative. As Canada seeks to become as economically competitive and resilient as possible, we must ensure that our market is seen as honest and fair, and therefore a safe place to invest. A crucial component of that effort is strong and effective enforcement, to hold individuals accountable when they harm our market through fraud, market manipulation, and misrepresentation. I ask that you consider our proposed amendment to the BIA as a meaningful way to support strong enforcement and enhance the fight against financial fraud in Canada. Thank you again for your time today. I welcome any questions.
Thank you very much. I'm going to turn the floor now to you, Mr. Patterson. Upwards of 5 minutes for your introductory remarks, sir.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee, for the invitation. My name is Ian L. Patterson, and I'm CEO of Plurilock, a Canadian cybersecurity company. For 10 years, I've built and patented systems that verify who people are and delivered cybersecurity for government agencies and businesses. I'm here as an operator with a practical view of why fraud works and what would slow it down. I'll offer 3 recommendations to combat the fraud that's hurting everyday Canadians. But first, I'll start with a story. A grandfather gets a phone call. He hears his grandson's voice. He's been in a car accident and needs money right now. He drives to the bank, gets the funds, and hands a money order to a stranger who showed up in person to collect it. Only later, when the family compared notes, did the truth come out. The grandson was fine. The voice was a deep fake. It was a fraud. That's one story. I have many, as do, I think, most Canadians. Canadians reported $704 million in losses to the Anti-Fraud Centre in 2025, which was the worst year on record. And the RCMP estimates only 5 to 10% of fraud ever gets reported, which means the real cost to the Canadian economy runs into the billions. So what do we do? In cybersecurity, we talk about prevention as left of boom and response as right of boom. First, left of boom. Prevention comes down to identity. Fraud works because we still verify people with things that are easy to fake: phone numbers, text messages, passwords, and now voices. Back in 2019, I wrote in the Globe and Mail that my video game provider had better security than my bank. 7 years later, not much has changed, and deep fakes and voice cloning are letting bad guys automate and scale their attacks. The fix is stronger identity that everyday Canadians can trust. When your telco, your bank, or your government reaches out, it should come over a channel that can't easily be spoofed, like a push notification from a smartphone app. When you sign into a service, it should be with credentials that can't easily be phished, like passkeys, which no one could read over the phone to a criminal. And when it's human to human, the answer is resilience. Criminals can fake a phone number and a familiar voice. So hang up, call back a number you know, and ask about shared context, like, what did Aunt Bertha bring to Christmas dinner last year? Cheap habits beat expensive technology. That grandfather in the story wasn't careless. He did what all of us were taught to do: trust the voice on the line. That's what has to change, and it's fixable. Government should go first. Every Canadian knows the fake CRA call. If the CRA and agencies like it used channels that can't easily be spoofed, they'd end one of the most common scams in the country and set the standard for everyone else. Second, right of boom. Response comes down to coordination. When the victim, the bank, the phone company, and the criminal sit in different jurisdictions, the first question is always, who owns the file? Our police officers are some of the most mission-driven people I know, but too often the local police agency that ends up with the file doesn't have the training, tools, or mandate to chase this kind of crime. And that police detachment has to weigh a $5,000 scam against an armed robbery down the street. The criminals count on that weakness and exploit it. We have a start, the National Cybercrime Coordination Center, but its role is to support, and the investigating still falls to individual officers. Canada needs a national response that leads these cases, not just supports them, one that cuts across jurisdictional boundaries, brings banks and telecoms to the table with privacy built in, and a mandate to chase these crimes whatever the dollar amount. Third, Canada cannot tackle these issues on its own. Some of the biggest operations originate outside the country. In the Indo-Pacific, scam compounds run at industrial scale, often staffed by trafficked workers targeting Canadians. We need to invest more in international assistance to help dismantle these networks at the source before they reach Canadians. Fraud is an identity problem, a coordination problem, and a test of our resilience. Every day, Canadians are being electronically mugged by criminals who've turned this into an industry, one that runs on the seams in our system. Those seams are ours to close. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Patterson. Mr. Pinto, turn the floor to you now, sir, for upwards of 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for the invitation to appear today. As Payments Canada's Chief Delivery Officer, I lead large-scale delivery programs, including Canada's real-time rail and its central fraud services, with over 35 years of experience in transforming financial technology and operations. Payments Canada owns and operates the critical national payments infrastructure, its systems, rules, and standards that help keep Canada's economy moving. Established by the Canadian Payments Act, we are a national public purpose organization that operates on a non-profit basis. Our board of directors is majority independent, and the Minister of Finance is responsible for our enabling legislation. Our systems, which are overseen by the Bank of Canada, include LINKS, Canada's high-value payment system used by participants to clear and settle primarily wire payments and large-value payments, the Automated Clearing Settlement System, ACSS, which clears and settles retail batch payments like direct deposits and debits, and Canada's forthcoming real-time rail, which I will speak to in a moment. In 2025, our system safely cleared and settled $103 trillion between institutions. Our vision is to enable prosperity, productivity, and safety for Canada through trusted world-class payments. Our legislated public policy objectives are to promote the efficiency, safety, and soundness of our systems. Our perspective on fraud requires a clarification on the unique role we play. Payments Canada's systems, rules, and standards allow our system participants, including financial institutions, payment service providers, and credit unions, to move funds safely between one another. We do not hold, have visibility to, or manage any individual customer bank accounts, nor do we see any private data. But as fraud threats evolve, we all have a role. Our own research reinforces the rate at which fraud threats are growing, and that these threats are not evenly distributed across Canada's demographics, often targeting Canada's most vulnerable. Fraud arises through multiple channels, sectors, and parties, and there's no single solution or institution that can solve it in isolation. This is why Payments Canada strongly supports the Government of Canada's establishment of the Financial Crimes Agency and its commitment to develop a national anti-fraud strategy. Our consultation submission on that strategy emphasizes the need for purpose-driven data sharing across sectors, coordinated regulation and oversight to ensure fair, predictable outcomes across industries, and strengthened collaborative consumer education. Payments Canada is also an active member of the Canadian Anti-Scam Coalition. Our biggest contribution to the fight against fraud and a centerpiece of Canada's payment infrastructure innovation is Canada's Real-Time Rail, or RTR, which is launching in Q4 of this year with centralized fraud services. Combined with broader access to our membership and systems, the RTR will enable competition, innovation, economic growth, and financial inclusion by delivering instant irrevocable payments, 24/7 availability, and data-rich ISO 20022 messaging. We have benefited from extensive engagement and learnings in other jurisdictions who have found that while new risks emerge, real-time transactions can be safe transactions. No payment type is immune to fraud. That's why Canada will be the first to launch its national real-time payment system with mandatory fraud mitigation on day one. These 4 requirements are: 1, real-time fraud transaction scoring with network-level insights to inform fraud management and payment decisioning. 2, a centralized intelligence platform that provides national reporting with aggregated fraud insights. 3, a shared and centrally managed risk list to track and flag attributes of those involved in confirmed fraud. And 4, confirmation of payee capability, allowing individuals to verify the account identity of the recipient. Also, the RTR's use of ISO 20022 messaging standard will unlock powerful new analytics, allowing participants to better track and disrupt complex fraud patterns. Further, the RTR is designed to facilitate compliance with anti-money laundering requirements for cross-border indicators. Modernizing Canada's payment infrastructure is a nation-building exercise. Payments Canada is fully committed to supporting collaborative efforts to safeguard Canadians in this pivotal era for payments. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pinto. Okay, colleagues, we'll turn to our round of questioning. Mr. Falk, the floor will be yours for 6 minutes, sir.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for your testimony here. Mr. Pinto, I would like to begin my questions with you. Find instances of fraud.
That's a great question. So if a transaction is split between the exchange of values between end consumers and businesses, that part we don't typically get involved in. Historically, the settlement between the sender and receiving institution or bank is the part that we clear through Bank of Canada settlement accounts. That mix of exchange, clearing, and settlement through Bank of Canada accounts with RTR actually gets combined because all 3 of those steps start happening in a sub-second transaction. So that's why it was important on RTR. It's the first time we have purview into some of the origination of where fraud occurs. The discussions that we've been hearing so far are generally at the exchange level.
Okay, so you're very, very excited about RTR coming on later this year, and you believe that that's going to assist you in minimizing and reporting in real time scams and fraud.
Yes.
Okay. Is there anything that can be done between now and then to mitigate some of the fraud that's happening in the system today?
Probably, the answer globally is yes. From Payments Canada's purview, we currently operate Lynx and ACSS, and we're 1 quarter away from launching our first foray into fraud and the exchange layer of payments. So yeah, I think I would, that might be a better purview for the banks and institutions that are currently involved in the exchange of transactions today versus Payments Canada, who are involved in the settlement.
And are you involved in all the settlements in Canada?
Yes.
Okay, your organization participates?
Fiat currency?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. Okay. Mr. Patterson, I'd also like to ask you some questions. In your story of the grandfather being scammed, at a previous committee meeting, we had testimony from MEDA here, and one of the questions we posed to them as their level of accountability as the ones providing a conduit or a medium through which scamming is happening. What degree of responsibility do you think the mediums should hold?
Thank you for the question. I think that when we're talking about fraud prevention, this is really a societal level resiliency exercise we have to go through. Certainly, technology platforms, be it social media platforms, be it banks, telcos, et cetera, they can all play a role. I don't think that there's any one platform or any one provider that stands out to me as a bigger issue than the other. I think that the larger aspect to this problem is that there are certain habits and customs and practices that we across society have adopted, whether implicitly or explicitly. And these are things like logging in with a password, trusting that a phone call that you get is coming from an authorized person, believing that the voice you hear belongs to that person. Those are actually the root cause of how some of this fraud is perpetrated, and those are the things that I believe that we need to address.
Some of the information that we had here at committee was that 2/3 of scams happen on MEDA platforms. You don't believe that MEDA has a responsibility in this aspect?
I think that all technology platforms have a responsibility, but I would also say that that email and SMS messages carry a large chunk of scams as well. I think the reality, and certainly from what I have seen over my career over the last 10 years, is that bad guys will adopt whatever is being used. If Meta is the most popular platform, absolutely that's where they're going to go. If WhatsApp becomes the dominant communication platform, I fully believe that that will become the #1 platform that they use. So I don't think that it's any one company's responsibility. I do genuinely believe that we can all play a leadership role in increasing the resiliency across society.
How do you think Plurilock would fit into the equation of reducing scamming and fraud?
So thank you for the question. So Plurilock is primarily a B2B company. We typically don't work directly with consumers. Although given our leadership in the cybersecurity space, I am frequently the guy that people call when they get into a problem. That story that I shared with you about the grandfather, that was somebody in my network who approached me simply asking for help. I think as it pertains to helping organizations become cyber resilient, certainly that is something that we do. I will caveat to say that that my organization historically has done significantly more business in the United States, and I'm here principally as a Canadian citizen, looking to share my experiences to make Canada a safer and more prosperous nation.
Finally, to Mrs. Corrigal-Brown, do you believe that we currently have adequate resources to prosecute people that are actually charged with crime and fraud offenses?
In a tight 30 seconds here, please, Ms. Corrigal-Brown. Thank you.
I think there's always, we in the federal government and the Crown agencies, we make do with what we have, and but there's always, as we've all identified, the scope of the problem and the scope of the harm to Canadians. We absolutely welcome the federal government's focus in this area and the opportunity to partner by securities regulators. I agree with what my colleagues have said, that it needs to be a national, full society response. So I do think that the allocation of resources and attention to this matter is important and necessary.
Mr. Baines, you're online today. I looked to my right where you would typically be, and you weren't there. The floor is yours for 6 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to our witnesses, thank you for joining us for this very important study. And I think, like Mr. Pedersen, you've mentioned, there's you've shared a story, but there's so many that I've heard from constituents, family members, and of course ourselves, getting these calls that we get and SMS messages. So it's a rather complex problem that we're dealing with, and it's a global issue. We're ultimately seeing issues around extortion, and so we're trying to just wrapping around all of these different ways that people are being attacked. And I was wondering if you can maybe just very quickly share, like, so the cyber threats facing different organizations and governments differ between Canada and the U.S., like vulnerabilities specifically that you can point to where fraudsters most commonly exploit when targeting, whether it's systems that each government has or the regulations that they have in overseeing some of these platforms like Meta, WhatsApp, and if you can share something on that.
Thank you for the question. So if I could perhaps maybe speak to resilience and also vulnerabilities. I think one of the things that will come as no surprise to anybody here is that AI has really made scams to author perfect English, whereas previously, one of the most common ways of identifying if an email was real or fraudulent because
I'm not sure if it's on our end or your end, but we're getting a little bit of choppiness. So I'm going to let it go one more time, but if it disconnects, it just makes things a little bit too difficult for the interpreters to work with, and I may have to circle back to you if we get a correction in that connection. And I'm looking now, and you appear to be frozen. So,
Um,
if you can hear me, we're just going to have to try again in a few minutes. Ms. Baines, the floor remains yours.
Okay, you know what? I'm going to move to Ms. Corrigal Brown, if you could. The bankruptcy, you talked a large focus of the work that you're doing and your advocacy around reforming bankruptcy laws, preventing bad actors from abusing laws and hiding their gains from fraud behind bankruptcy protections. How can we improve this?
So thank you very much for the question. The securities regulators are sort of this is a very specific focus of the regulators. We are also involved across the board at sort of prevention, detection, disruption, enforcement. What we find, though, is that this has been an area that has persisted for years, that we have taken the efforts to detect, investigate, held hearings, and then we have held people accountable by imposing sanctions, and then they have made no effort to pay their sanctions, but have turned to our bankruptcy regime and sought to be released in bankruptcy, and therefore avoiding paying those sanctions and avoiding all consequences of their actions. So what we are asking is that there are some debts that do not that do survive bankruptcy. So a person is discharged in bankruptcy, but some debts they remain obliged to pay. And so what we are asking is that debts that are imposed by securities regulators for the most egregious kinds of misconduct, fraud, and market manipulation and misrepresentation, that they would be added to the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act by amending the Act so that those debts would survive bankruptcy, and we could continue to collect on them as the person continues with the rest of their debts could be discharged. And we think that's essential because as much as we recognize the absolute importance and necessity to disrupt fraud before it happens, that's the best way to ensure that investors don't lose their money and to retain their confidence in participating in our economy and to protect Canadians. So early disruption is essential. But the system also needs to have strong and effective enforcement. We need to be able to be seen to be able to manage and to regulate our economy and to protect Canadians. And so having strong enforcement and having amending the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act so that people who commit this kind of misconduct can't declare bankruptcy and therefore avoid all consequences of their action. We think that's an essential part to close a gap at the end stage. If we have actually held someone accountable, we think that they should continue to be obliged to pay those sanctions.
And quite often we witness people moving. If they commit some fraud, they'll move to a different jurisdiction. First, maybe if you can mention if the provinces and territories are aligned on this within Canada, and then other jurisdictions that can maybe that you're working closely with outside of to tackle this problem, and if there's jurisdictions that can serve as a model for us to compare to.
Yes. Okay. All Canadian securities regulators, provincial and territorial, support this request. It is a problem across the country, and we are all are supportive. We work very closely together, the provincial securities regulators, in order to have a harmonized security regulatory regime that protects investors and ensures that our markets are fair and have integrity. We also work, the markets are global, fraud is global. So we work very closely with counterparts in Europe, in Asia, in the United States. The United States bankruptcy regime is of note. Sanctions imposed by their securities regulators do not get extinguished on bankruptcy. So that is a policy decision that has been made in the United States, and that's what we're recommending, that we mirror that here.
Thank you.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Saint-Marie, you have the floor for 5 minutes. Yes, thank you to all witnesses. I would also like to thank you.
Madame,
My first question is for Ms. Corrigal Brown. In connection with your request, and the exchanges here today. Does the federal government seem open to amending the BIA to impose these requested changes?
We've had discussions with ISET officials over the last over a year that have been productive, and we've met with the Department of Finance and the Department of Industry. We've met with representatives on this committee. We've been invited to present to this committee. I would say that the federal government has been very open to discussions and to hearing our request and better understanding how the challenge that this is raising for securities regulators. Yes.
Continuer à leur rappeler que cette demande est très
All right, in that case, we'll continue reminding them that this request is very important. Once again, on another subject, the question of cryptocurrency.
une forme de monnaie ou plutôt une
Cryptocurrency as a currency or a security?
Cryptocurrency, what a great question. Cryptocurrency in itself, when it's used as a payment method, we see as a currency. So we don't regulate cryptocurrency itself as a security.
Et pour les plateformes d'échange de crypto, est-ce que
And for crypto exchange platforms, these are considered as financial intermediaries, and so you don't regulate them at that point?
We do regulate crypto trading platforms if those trading platforms are trading in what we call crypto contracts. So essentially, they are contracts which have as their underlying, like the contract's value is referenced on the underlying cryptocurrency. And so actually the crypto contract is a derivative. And so we do regulate the trade in those crypto contracts. So those crypto trading platforms are subject to our regulation.
Merci. Est-ce que dans la lutte à la fraude, quand il est question des crypto-monnaies,
In the fight against fraud,
le rôle du fédéral
when cryptocurrency is involved, do you think the federal government should step in?
Avec les mécanismes auxquels vous faisiez référence?
Or securities regulators, with the collaboration you have in place, need to do this work when it comes to crypto?
We think in crypto as in sort of the capital markets and fraud as well. There's really the necessity for the federal government and the provincial securities regulators to work together, because there are the crypto itself, for example, when it's used as a payment, that is, there's federal jurisdiction and federal bodies that are, that regulate in that space, and the regulation and the protections that they provide for Canadians are essential. And yet crypto also can be used in the investment markets and for investment purposes, which we regulate, and we have different protections and powers in order to address the risks that they create for Canadians. So it's really essential that we work together and partner. Otherwise, there are gaps. And we might, so I think I would say that, again, this is where the fact that the federal government is focusing on this and taking such a holistic view of how we could combat fraud and the way that fraud and the way that crypto is not only used for legitimate purposes, but also for fraud. We need to understand that working together at the provincial and federal level.
Monsieur le Président, mes prochaines questions seront pour Monsieur Pinto de...
Thank you for your answers. Now, my next few questions are for Mr. Pinto from Payments Canada. First question, for your centralized platform,
comme les banques et autres acteurs,
are different intermediaries like banks and other actors, is it voluntary or mandatory participation?
Okay, thank you for the question. For any of our participants who are using RTR or a third-party exchange that clears through the RTR's clearing and settlement, it is mandatory. It is the 4 services that I described. That is the network level risk score will be consumed by them. It's available to them, and it needs to go into their adjudication process as to whether to proceed with a payment. There's a requirement in our rules to report fraud, coming from account-to-account fraud with a common national taxonomy. There's an obligation under specification to contribute to the risk list, and there's a requirement to use the confirmation of payee to identify a valid account. So that includes all new participants coming into the RTR directly, as well as the first third-party exchange, which is Interax e-Transfer, all mandatory.
OK, merci beaucoup. Il me reste environ 30 secondes. Est-ce que vous pouvez nous donner plus de détails sur le système de points?
Thank you for your answer. Can you give us more
Si c'est trop complexe, vous pouvez.
by fraudulent transactions? If it's too complex, you can send us a written answer. But can you please just give us a brief 30-second overview?
I think I cut out just a little bit of what you heard right in the middle. So could you repeat the first part of the question? I didn't catch it in the translation.
Si vous pouvez nous donner plus de détails sur.
Could you give us more details on how the point system to evaluate potential fraudulent transactions work?
So it's we worked with our members on the type of indicators they need from a score to come back into their system. So they help define the requirements. We run those through algorithms that then provide, very effectively a caution, perhaps don't proceed, or a yellow, please investigate, or no, a green zone for them to adjudicate. Those type of scores get ingested in our participants' pre-payment initiation fraud checks. So before they send a payment through the RTR, they have all of their internal systems. Let's say you're a bank, we're a fintech. They would run through that and make a decision using algorithms to proceed with the payment or not. It allows them to hold the payment and do further investigation, or to reject the payment because it's been identified as fraud.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci, Monsieur Saint-Marie. Ms. Borelli, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much.
My question is for Mr. Pinto. Many fraud victims, including seniors and small businesses, are manipulated into spending or sending mass money transfers, but the payment systems treat the transaction as final. What options exist to make high-risk payments more interruptible and recoverable? For example, maybe temporary holds, recall mechanisms, delayed settlement for suspicious transfers, and the like?
That's a great question, and it's commonly misunderstood what is recoverable versus irrevocable. So our rules basically have been written to allow for certain categories of high-risk payments or known fraud, et cetera, to actually be required to be returned. So we set up rules that say, here's the mechanisms by which the sending and receiving organization under certain mechanisms will agree to actually return funds. The irrevocability has to do if that doesn't kick in. So if that rule wasn't an indicator of needing to return, then it's irrevocable. And even when money has to be returned, it's a second transaction that comes back. That's the way to think about that. And then as far as putting holds on it, we go back to the discussion we just had around the fraud indicators and the score. So before an RTR transaction, actual payment transactions initiated in sub-second time, that fraud check and a check against the risk list and ingestion of the score would go into the participants' algorithms, and they could decide to place a hold and investigate and decide what they could do with it case by case.
Okay. And in your opinion, should the federal government set a clear policy expectation that payment modernization must include not only faster payments, but faster fraud response?
It's a good question. Thank you for that. To the extent that we've come to designing and launching RTR, that has been the expectation. So both our membership, our future membership through new participants coming in with wider expansion, and our regulatory guidance have all required that we make this mandatory via our rules and via an initial market offer launching simultaneously with the system.
So should there be a centralized hub where sectors like police can access, can cooperate with access to the data necessary to prosecute fraudsters?
I think it's an astute question. The centralized hub, let's separate that from the need to collaborate. The need to collaborate, absolutely. Law enforcement, prosecution, the channels like, as we talked about, social media, who might have data, telcos, banks, et cetera. There's got to be a mechanism to be able to collaborate and share data where required for financial crime fighting. We, in the National Fraud Strategy and the Financial Crimes Agency, a lot of that type of discussion we're expecting to get engaged in as part of it. The notion of a centralized hub pooling data from all of those sources hasn't been a big part of the discussion. It's been more what will be the official mechanisms to share data in a collaborative way and build schemes to share data amongst all those involved in fraud prevention and detection and prosecution across a pretty wide network.
And Mr. Patterson, many seniors are targeted through fake tech support scams or bank impersonation scams where the victim is convinced to install remote access software. Once that happens, the scammer may be able to guide or control the transaction. So what technical safeguards could help detect when a person is being coached or controlled remotely through a financial transaction?
Thank you for the question. Is key, but as well in terms of specific technical controls that can be put in place is visibility, so understanding what you are installing, what it does, and frankly, making use of existing technology such as firewalls. So these don't require additional cost. Windows and Mac.
Ouais, je comprends. Merci. Mr. Patterson, unfortunately, bits and pieces of what you said, you're coming in continuously choppy. So what I'm going to do is move on. However, it will provide Ms. Borelli an opportunity to ask that question again down the line here to see if the connection has improved. And if not, we'll have her submit that question to you in writing, at which point you can resubmit your answer to the committee. But we can hear you enough, but the challenge is for the interpreters. So unfortunately, I just can't rely confidently on the status of the connection at the moment. So we'll try to come back to you, sir. Okay. All right, Ms. Borelli, so that was, we were at the end of your time there, but as I say, well...
I believe.
No, you didn't. You had 5 minutes and we were over. So I'll circle back to allow you to ask that question again if you so choose, or another question as a result of the technical
What do you mean by circle backs?
What I mean is that in a few minutes, to see if that connection stabilizes, I'm going to allow you the opportunity to take 45 seconds or a minute back and ask that question or another question again.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bardisi, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Ms. Corgill-Brown, you mentioned the relationship between cryptocurrencies and this issue that we're studying today. Government of Canada has announced intention to help create a stablecoin framework, but we also have this issue with and we're standing up a financial crimes agency. Could you just speak to, and some written advice afterwards would be great, what the collective security regulators' view is on melding these two pieces at the same time, both the introduction of a stablecoin framework and the introduction of the financial crimes agency?
What I would say is thank you for that question. We have our enforcement directors and the enforcement committee across the CSA are working and we've met with representatives in relation to the Financial Crimes Agency and are also working with the federal government in the development of sort of consulting with and providing our views to the federal government in the development of the stablecoin legislation. We absolutely it is important. There will be the need to ensure that that our jurisdictions that there is sort of respect for the respective jurisdictions, but also that there's a really clear ability to share information and to have sort of cooperative and partnered oversight over entities as stablecoin is used in by different market participants for different purposes. I mean, it's just our financial system. These products and these businesses move through the jurisdiction. So we need to partner together. And so what I would say is sort of at the highest level is we are partnering and we have offered our strong support and our view that collaboration and information sharing is absolutely essential.
Mr. Bardisi, I'm just going to pause the clock for 1 second. Mr. Patterson, if you can hear me, we just to try to correct this problem, we do have some folks from the tech side here at the House of Commons who are trying to reach out to you. So if you want to take a moment to check your, we're going to try to have you sign out and sign back in. So I wanted to just prompt you to keep an eye out for that. Mr. Bardisi, you've got 3 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Ms. Corrigal-Brown. We'd love to get some written recommendation on that. With further thoughts. Mr. Pinto,
Absolutely.
So I understand that Interac is the exchange solution provider for real-time rail. And so coming out of that project, or coming into that project rather, what are the questions that Payments Canada is asking of Interac, which also runs the e-transfer network, which is well known by Canadians, with respect to some of the potential vulnerabilities that could emerge from the partnership that you have with Interac? And what do you think needs to be attended to?
Do you refer to, thank you for the question, are you referring to technical vulnerabilities or something wider in the relationship?
Take it where you will.
Okay.
Yeah.
So our approach on RTR is, Payments Canada is the owner and operator of the total RTR solution. It's made up of several components. It's made up of a clearing and settlement component. It's made up of a brand new exchange. That exchange has leveraged Interac's expertise in e-transfer for the last 22 years and said, well, let's take that, put a modern architecture to it, and have that as a net new piece. Interac is a provider in that regard. And then the third piece is Interac's e-transfer will convert to use the new clearing and settlement engine that has been built. So from as opposed to not so much a vulnerability, but an opportunity that we have here, the things like protection around fraud covers even the in-market solution that's been there for 24 years, including building on what we've learned from e-transfer and giving it an uplift with the types of extra features that we're adding onto it. Secondly, our rules allow for a wide scope of those mandatory fraud controls.
But just to pick up on Mr. Falk's question earlier, e-transfer is unfortunately one of those vectors that social media as a vector towards e-transfer as the mechanism by which social media enabled frauds are executed. Are there any specific questions you're asking of Interact with respect to this this project, given that reality?
Our participants in RTR in both cases are the banks, financial institutions, credit unions, and PSPs. Right? The social media interaction happens at that layer. So again, the direct participants is where that intersection with their customers and social media and telcos, et cetera, will happen. What we've put in place with Interac, where we can help as things flow through exchange and clearing and settlement, are a greater degree of mandatory reporting against a common taxonomy that helps trends and sees movement of that can feed back to Interact participants and ours as required. The risk list will help with everybody. If one institution identifies a confirmed scans, 7 others can prevent that from happening and use it to actually stop a payment. So we're a little bit at the mid to back end of the thing, but we're adding tools that will help the participants at their front end where scams and fraud is occurring.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bardisi. Monsieur Saint-Marie, 2 minutes 30 seconds, monsieur.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Hello, thank you, Mr. Chair. I will ask Mr. Pinto a question. So I'll ask 2 questions back to back. So when it comes to your RTR system,
Une banque ou une institution financière.
Can a financial institution decide to not use it?
De ne pas l'utiliser.
Do they have the right not to use it? And then I'll ask my second question on.
Yeah, so there's it's a great question. You're talking about using the four fraud controls. So it's mandatory that they consume it. But once they consume it, their internal risk policies are what guide, their individual thresholds on what to pass and what to fail. And most of them, all of them, we have supplementary tools. So, for example, they might be absorbing 4 different scores, including the one that we're providing that has kind of some network level efficacy to add to what they're using today. So that part of it, they'll choose which score and threshold amongst a number of tools to decide to let their payments through or to stop. And that's because they bear the liability as the sender. They do the checks before, and generally they've got to deal with fraud that arises between their own fraud losses and customer fraud losses. So that's kind of where it leads to. The parts of the solution that are mandatory via our rules are the contribution to the risk list and the contribution to the standard reporting nationally.
OK, merci beaucoup. Et juste pour être sûr d'avoir...
Thank you. Just to make sure that I really understood, your RTR system is to set it up with the anti-fraud system. It's not just to accelerate payment systems that are already really quick, but to improve security. And which is why you're saying that with that, Canada might be among the first countries to have such a security system. Is that correct?
Great question. It's just getting clarification on when what we saw was other countries launched their instant payment rails without direct attention to the type of new and different frauds that can accompany real-time payments. We have seen the types of solutions that they've put in place, and then we worked with our members and said, I think there were a couple of dozen different things that could be done at the national level. They ended up picking these 4 and said, well, let's make sure that goes out on day one as part of the solution. It is available for all the incumbent banks using e-transfer or all the new participants that will use either e-transfer or RTR Direct. And it is available to all. So whether you've had 20 years history in banking or you're a 2-year-old fintech, it is available to you with a network level of protection and insight.
Merci.
Merci, Mr. Saint-Marie. Mr. Lawton, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Saint-Marie.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It's great to be here on this committee for the first time. I'd like to start with you, Mr. Patterson. Hopefully we've had the technical issues worked out here. Just because one thing I understand about safeguarding against frauds and scams is that it's very much a multi-layered effort. There are individual decisions people can make to protect themselves, and then at the system level we also have protections that are needed. And I'm just wondering in that context, given that the security work you do, what caution could be given to the government in the context of Bill C-22, the Lawful Access Act, which actually requires the insertion of backdoors into what are right now secure? And just thinking of how that would affect people's vulnerability to bad actors using those same back doors instead of just law enforcement.
My apologies for the internet connectivity issue. I'm very concerned around proposed backdoors. What we have seen in the industry for decades now is well-intended efforts to create vulnerabilities inside systems, which inevitably are used by bad guys to get access to that data. We saw this most recently in the United States with a nation state that was able to compromise the lawful access in the telephony system in the United States. So I would focus more the government's attention to how do we build stronger systems across the board. There are definitely technologies I mentioned passkeys, as well as phishing resistant or spoofing resistant communication channels. There's absolutely newer technologies that can make a material impact on reducing fraud. And I think that we should start there as opposed to trying to weaken systems.
And I think if I extrapolate from what you're saying, or perhaps try to tighten it up in a way that other people could draw from this, any vulnerability that might exist for the good guys is also there for the bad guys. Is that an accurate summation of what you're saying there?
Very accurate, sir.
In terms of the way that we navigate these and other related issues here, I'm just a little bit confused because we have done so much, I think, to try to prevent people from, having themselves able to be targeted by this. And one of the things that strikes me as so interesting is that we have basically this game of whack-a-mole where the technology is evolving more quickly than the education is. So what role do you think literacy plays in safeguarding against fraud?
Thank you. I think literacy is crucially important. I would also say that not only is it a whack-a-mole game from a technology perspective, it's also a whack-a-mole game from a legislation perspective. I don't believe that fraud can be legislated away. It has to be a team effort by both public agencies as well as private corporations and individual citizens that all take responsibility for their respective area to address these issues. That sounds like a hard thing to do, but I am focus on this issue. We can have a material impact on reducing fraud for Canadians.
I'm going to take that glitch as my cue to move on to my other questions to Ms. Corrigal-Brown. Ms. Corrigal-Brown, you're obviously representing the BC Securities Commission, and I know that the overall structure of the securities system in Canada is outside of the scope of this study, but I do wonder, just in a fraud and scam prevention perspective, just looking at the things that fall under securities regulators, if there is a problem we're facing in Canada and that we have a patchwork of regulators and regulations when so many of these frauds and scams are national in nature or even global?
Well, I think that absolutely we recognize that because they're national and global, that's why Canadian securities regulators work so closely together in our enforcement efforts. And there can be circumstances where you have victims that are in multiple jurisdictions, and in which case our enforcement teams work closely together. As you say, also the fact that it is national and the fact that the federal government under the Federal Criminal Code and has a role to play. That's also why we've, as I've said here, representing the BCSC, but also the CSA, why we are very excited and strongly committed to working with the federal government in terms of the focused role that the federal government will play. But absolutely.
Nothing falling through the cracks by having multiple securities regulators in Canada?
I think as in Canada, we work very well together. We actually, in terms of areas that are regulated by the provincial regulators, we work. We're mostly harmonized in our rules. We enforce together. We work regularly on almost all activities together. So there's always gaps. There's always possibilities for improvement. But in terms of providing a strong regulatory regime for the Canadian capital markets, I think the provincial regulators, we work very well and strive to serve the Canadian markets well.
Mr. Patterson, I'm going to try to take advantage of what was a stable connection and honor my commitment to provide Ms. Borelli with those 60 seconds back. So we're going to try this again. So Ms. Borelli, I give you an opportunity to ask a question and a response from Mr. Patterson, and then I'll go to Mr. Joseph.
Thanks. Mr. Patterson, I've heard from seniors who've been convinced to install remote access software. And once that happens, they ended up losing quite a lot of money. What technical safeguards could help detect that kind of thing happening? And should banks or payment platforms be required to add extra verifications in that regard?
Thank you. Education is key. Beyond education, technical safeguards such as using built-in firewalls can certainly play a role to identify specifically remote access types of tools that those can be identified and stopped at the operating system level. Beyond that, certainly coordination with payments companies certainly will help in this regard.
Do you have any idea of any programs that can help teach seniors how to do this?
I think that unfortunately this is only one of several scams that exists. Romance scams, unfortunately, are another one that will often target seniors. And as some of the members mentioned, it is a whack-a-mole game. And so education on holistically scams that can occur is something that should happen and is the first line of defense.
Thank you, Ms. Borelli. Monsieur Joseph, c'est à vous pour 5 minutes, monsieur.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. So I would like to ask a question to Mr. Pinto, but I would also like to take the opportunity to thank all the witnesses for being here today. So Mr. Pinto, we know that most fraudsters or fraudster organizations are not in Canada. They live in different countries. So do you have data? Could you tell us, for example, what is the most frequent country where these players live?
Thank you for the question. I don't have that data in front of me. We do have an active research department that uncovers these. If I could bring back information through the chair and share it, that would be ideal.
Monsieur Pinto, je vais aller dans la même ligne avec my collègue.
All right, I will turn to my colleague. So in terms of deep fakes, now that they can imitate very convincingly the voice or the image of a person, and they are used more and more in fraud. So Mr. Pinto, what danger do these phenomena represent for Canadians, and what should we prioritize to deal with those issues?
The deep fakes being technologically adept and creating victims in Canada increasingly. From a Payments Canada perspective, the best contribution that we think we need to grow from an infrastructure out is that centralized reporting on the types of fraud and look for the trends that are happening so the entire ecosystem, payments ecosystem can benefit. And then secondly, as we successfully identify or prosecute any one of these actors who are committing these frauds, make that knowledge available to everybody through our risk list. I'm not in a position to comment on the best ways to protect it at the front end where the exchange is happening. That's probably better coming from my colleagues.
Merci, monsieur.
Microphone, please. We know that fraudsters are targeting Canadians more and more from abroad. What would your recommendations be? And I'm addressing Ms. Corrigal-Brown. How can we address this issue that's happening abroad?
That's a great question. It is challenging for us to take action against foreign people who are accessing Canadians from abroad. That's one of the reasons why we do work very closely, and we have memorandums of understanding with European regulators, American regulators, and regulators in Asia and Australia, and we work closely with them in order to share information and to work with them to try to identify people who are outside our country, and then they can be prosecuted in their country. But I would say that the reality is, I think that as we've heard from other people, in some ways, detection and prevention disruption at the front end by working through, the way that fraudsters are accessing Canadians is through the internet, is through technology providers. And so, this kind of thinking around what the federal government can do in terms of legislation and in terms of thinking on interventions at that level and being able to access actors in this country. Yep.
How much time do I have left, Mr. Chair? How many minutes? I want to make sure. 45 seconds. Okay. I will ask a last question to Ms. Corrigal-Brown. So in the 2025 budget, the creation of the crime agency was mentioned. And in the update, we launched a national strategy to fight fraud. Which of these initiatives, or where should these agencies, where should we focus our efforts on prevention and so forth? What's your view?
I think it should be holistic. I do think that we strongly support both of these initiatives. So the taking action at the front end in order to have an anti-fraud strategy where you are empowering investors and informing them and educating them, where you are disrupting the activity at the level that it's happening, that is essential. But the fact is the fraud will happen, and we do need to demonstrate that we are watching, that there's integrity in our markets, and that's why we very strongly support the Financial Crimes Agency at the federal level to show that we are taking enforcement action and that there will be consequences, because I think that creates an atmosphere where we may be less attractive a place for people to try to come in and target.
Merci, Monsieur Joseph. OK, mais merci à tous les témoins. Thank you very much to all the witnesses for availing yourself.
Merci beaucoup. Nous apprécions les conseils que vous nous avez donnés. Alors, nous allons suspendre brièvement pour nous préparer à la deuxième séance. Donc, on fera une pause de 5 minutes.
welcome. We're going to continue in the second hour here. Thank you very much to Mr. Lynham that has joined us from the RCMP as the Director General for the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre. I think your testimony today is going to be quite crucial to our understanding of the role that the federal government plays in terms of addressing this challenge. Mr. Lynham, you'll have upwards of 5 minutes. You are the only witness that we have on this panel, which will allow us, I think, to get into the depths of your expertise. So upwards of 5 minutes. Colleagues, I did mention to a few of you just before gaveling in here that we are slightly behind and we are sitting 3 hours today, which will butt up against the beginning of question period. So there may be a slight reduction in this hour and in the next in terms of the amount of allocated time, but we will ensure that everybody has their opportunity to speak. With that, Mr. Lynham, again, thank you for joining. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Mr. Chair and honourable members of the committee, thank you for the invitation to appear today. I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Nation and recognize the enduring presence of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. My name is Chris Lynham. I am the Director General of the National Cybercrime Coordination Centre and the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre at the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Financial fraud and scams represent a significant, evolving, and increasing complex threat to Canadians and to our economy, with major impacts felt across the country. In 2025 alone, the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre received reports of fraud and cybercrime losses totaling over $700 million. This marks 8 consecutive years of record losses, and we assess that this represents only a fraction of the actual losses that are being felt. Fraud has become highly organized, industrialized, and automated. Canadians are targeted by industrial-scale scam compounds that employ thousands of individuals and operate from various parts of the world. They also face individual fraudsters who leverage easy-to-use, low-cost, fraud-as-a-service platforms. These schemes often rely on digital platforms and leverage emerging technologies, allowing threat actors with minimal technical expertise to defraud Canadians at scale. To provide an example, one recent phishing-as-a-service platform was used by thousands of Canada-based suspects, with almost 1 million Canadians falling victim to this platform alone. The threat environment continues to evolve rapidly, driven in large part by advances in technology and automation, particularly artificial intelligence. Criminal actors are using AI to generate convincing phishing messages, to draft and translate luring emails and texts, to produce deepfake impersonation and scamming videos and calls, to mine stolen data to identify new victims, and to exploit vulnerabilities in networks. Faced with these threats, the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre plays a central role in combating fraud in Canada along 4 lines of effort: prevention, victim support, disruption, and pursuing the criminals behind these scams. Prevention. The CAC uses targeted messaging to promote public awareness of fraud threats on its website, via social media, and through in-person engagements. The goal is to help Canadians recognize and avoid fraud and to encourage at-risk Canadians, particularly young people, to not to engage in fraud and cybercrime activities. Support for fraud victims. We assist victims by providing guidance to limit further losses and, in some cases, coordinating rapid action with partners to freeze or recover funds. We also provide tips to help victims avoid being victimized again in the future. The CAFC often receives information or intelligence about victims who do not know they are being scammed. For example, through a romance or what we now call a relationship fraud. In those cases, CAFC employees will reach out and warn those victims. Disruption. We work with financial institutions, telecommunications providers, and digital platforms to disrupt the fraud ecosystem by identifying and disrupting the entities, tools, and services, the so-called enablers, that facilitate fraud, pursuing those responsible. Finally, we enable investigations and help partners pursue those who are responsible by providing actionable intelligence and investigative leads, coordinating across multiple agencies, and linking Canadian efforts with multinational criminal investigations and operations. Reports received from members of the public and the business that have been targeted or victimized are a key component of the CAFC's efforts. Through our modernized reporting platform, reportcyberandfraud.canada.ca, Canadians can more easily report incidents of fraud and cybercrime. Additionally, the CAFC has built extensive partnerships in Canada and around the world to combat fraud. These partnerships are vital to tackling fraud in an investigative environment that is often complex, cross-border, and resource-intensive. Finally, the CAFC continues to pursue innovative and holistic approaches to reduce the impact of fraud on Canadians. We believe our 4 lines of effort approach is sound and produces tangible operational results, but we must work with more partners and to do it at a broader scale to reduce the levels of fraud victimization in Canada. Rest assured, we are fully committed to this mission. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lynham. Okay, Mr. Lawton, the floor will be yours for 6 minutes, sir.
Thank you much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much, Mr. Lynham, for being here today. Just as a bit of context, I've had rather a rude awakening on this issue in the last few months with a number of constituents I've spoken to that have been defrauded, in some cases out of small amounts and in others out of obscenely large ones. One case that is burned into my mind was that of a man who was in tears at a town hall I was hosting on fraud prevention alongside the St. Thomas Police Service. He had been hoodwinked for a small amount by a crypto scam, and then he was scammed again by a company or a person purporting to be part of an agency that would help him recoup his losses. And in the end, he and his wife were drained of everything they had, $80,000. And and when he shared his story, everyone else put up their hands because they had their own stories. So these are happening with more and more frequency. And I know and truly believe that you are committed to trying to stop this as much as possible. The one question I have for you is, how often can you succeed in getting money back? How often is something being recovered in these scams?
Question, and unfortunately we do hear, just as you heard from your constituents, these tragic stories of people, incidents of them losing their life savings. It is happening across Canada. Unfortunately, the percentage of the incidents that we can help to try and get people their money back, or at least frozen, is relatively small. Part of the challenge, though, is there's a lot of shame associated with reporting, and people don't report it. There is a window in some cases of if an e-transfer was made, if the victim doesn't report, that window might be over. So unfortunately, it is a small percentage of what we see, but we do encourage people to be reporting. And as we've talked about, and we're going to talk about, prevention is really key to try and avoid being victimized at the start.
I'm obviously more attuned to stories that are happening locally. There was a gift card scam recently in St. Thomas, $20,000. Cryptocurrency app fraud. Someone who had put money into a platform they really didn't even understand that much, and in the end had $10,000 taken of them. You have these fake investment schemes. Another one that came to us, someone out $3,000 or so. I know that all scams are different and whatnot, but just if you can generalize even somewhat, how many of these are coming from inside Canada versus outside of Canada?
It is very challenging often at the front end to determine where the scam happens, because they're scammers and they don't tell you where they're operating from. A large percentage of the various type of scam types are coming from abroad. I talked a little bit about the scam compounds. Those often are themed in things like investment scams or job scam. But there is fraud happening that starts in this country. And I talked about these fraud as a service platforms where people with very minimal technical skills can use these platforms to defraud Canadians. So it is a mix of both, but the majority comes from overseas.
I mentioned earlier the man who was taken for over $80,000, and the company, the fake law firm that was responsible for this, has a website that even now, even after police have been investigating this, is still up. And if someone goes to that website, they'll see the same information he did, pictures of people that look like they're lawyers talking about how they succeed in recouping money. Just to use that as an example, and others like it, I mean, why do these websites stay up, and what is needed from a policy perspective for things that are known to be frauds, known to be scams, to actually take those things offline?
I think it is you can imagine a horrible situation of someone who's lost their money and think there's an opportunity to get it back and going to what seems like a reputable institution. There's a couple of pieces to this. One, it's somewhat the nature of the internet, of like registering domains and how web hosters work, that almost anybody can put up a website, and there's not a huge amount of front end looking at how that works. Saying that, when we get that information, and from a disruptive perspective, we will often go to that web hoster, that domain registrar, and say, look, we think this site violates your terms of service. Ideally, there's an investigation going on in parallel, but part of the idea is to get that website taken down so that others can't be victimized. This is what this committee is doing, is looking at this of like, how do we make recommendations to have this holistic approach to reduce the level of victimization across the country.
I guess, are you having success there? And if not, what policy mechanism would you recommend that would help towards that? Taking on things that we can identify are frauds, we know the website that's serving as the gateway to that, taking that offline.
So I'll speak to what we're doing operationally, and part of this is a little bit of the theme is really the way forward is from an operational collaboration perspective is bringing as many partners together who have data of enablers of fraud, and then having organizations also lined up that can do something about that. So we hosted an operation called Maple Disruption last December, where we did that. We brought a whole bunch of partners together from the private and public sector, and at speed was able to have information come in and get it to the right entities who could take that action. We are going to be hosting Maple Disruption 2026 and do that at even a much bigger scale. So that just gives you a sense of we've got to be able to be doing this almost in real time if we're going to make a difference operationally.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lawton. Madame O'Rourke, the floor is yours for 6 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chair Carr, DG, and thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
I want to ask a question that's a little bit broader, because you're the DG of the National Cybercrime Coordination Center.
Sorry, Madame O'Rourke, I just need you to bend your microphone down towards you. Thank you very much.
Certainement. So as I was saying, you're the director of the National Cybercrime Coordination Center and the Canadian Anti-Fraud Center within the RCMP. So it's a very broad mandate, right? We have a bill before the House of Commons right now, C-22, and it proposes lawful access to give RCMP and police officers across this country more up-to-date digital tools to intercept crime. And I'm wondering if you could tell this committee why C-22 would be helpful in the case of disrupting and investigating all cybercrime, but also specifically frauds and scams.
One of the real challenges with what we call technologies that target cybercrime or cyber-enabled fraud is that it is the perpetrators are often in another jurisdiction, the victims are in a whole bunch of different jurisdictions across Canada, and then the data might be in even another jurisdiction. So to investigate that in a efficient and rapid way, police across the country need the right tools to do that, and legislation like C-22 and some of the powers it provides in that will, regardless of the crime type, but particularly those that have a digital, a significant digital element, will help us have the, additional tools to go after fraudsters and cyber criminals.
So is it the RCMP's position that C-22 lawful access is important in combating fraud and a whole range of cybercrime?
As I mentioned, digital tools or digital legislation that makes us be able to enforce crimes that have a major digital element, it is really important to have those modern tools. So C-22 is one of those that will assist police officers, if passed, to have further tools to complete their job.
do you have the tools that you need, or do the bad guys have better tools and constantly evolving ones?
One of the challenges with law enforcement is like we set a high bar for the type of technologies and tools that we adopt. They have to be legal. We have to make sure that they respect the privacy of Canadians, and so that process can often take a long time of how you actually vet those and then operationalize them. Cyber criminals and other criminals, they don't operate by those rules, right? The first sort of bad AI that can be accessed, they're going to jump on and figure out ways to do that. So there's always this this sort of cat and mouse games of like what new technologies are the criminals going to adopt, and so part of that is, you know, what my center does is work with as many police services across the country as possible to share information and come up with coordinated approaches to go after them, either before they can use these new tools or at the early onset.
I just want to switch gears a little bit. A special report published in Reuters cited internal meta documents that indicated that they had internally projected approximately 10% of its overall annual revenue in 2024, or $16 billion, was derived from fraudulent ads. So I have an insurance background, a municipal background. I'm familiar with joint and several liability. In that light, does this mean that Meta is a party to a fraud? And what more should platforms be doing to interfere with the fraudsters on their platform?
To the sort of first part of your question, I'm not sure I'm well placed to give an analysis of where liability lies. What I would say is all the digital platforms have a key responsibility in addressing the fraud and cybercrime challenges facing this country. We've had some great relationships with them of figuring out ways of how we can send them information, how they can send us information, and but there's more to be done. There absolutely is more to be done, you know, across the spectrum for the role of digital platforms in this.
Great. And just one last question. You mentioned that young people need to be more aware of fraud, and we have all received these calls in our constituency offices from seniors who have been defrauded, and it's quite possible they're the bravest in reporting. So tell us a little bit more about what the landscape looks like, because I'm thinking that some of the romance crimes, right, they're not necessarily seniors. So how do we tackle scams for each target audience, basically?
Great question, and it is how we approach it. A demographic of how you encourage prevention for a seniors audience, you need to take a different approach versus young people, which, you know, often they can be a click now and think later type of group of people. So we try and use different approaches. You know, a social media or online public awareness campaign might work better with a younger audience, whereas in-person engagements or printed material, and so we do a lot of that work. Finally, I'll say is, and I mentioned it in my remarks, is there's now this technical sophistication needed to become a fraudster cyber criminal is now very low. And so we spend some time doing outreach to young people who, you know, who maybe want to go onto these platforms or on a forum, who hear about how easy it is, and police, you know, are challenged to track them down, and to engage them and say, look, you do not want to go down this pathway. This will ruin your life. And there's more work to do on that front.
Sorry. Okay.
Thanks very much, Madame O'Rourke. Monsieur Saint-Marie, c'est à vous pour 6 minutes.
Mr. Saint-Marie, you have the mic for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Lehman, for your presence today. As you said, there are many types of fraud. I'll start with one that was already discussed. Facebook. Fraudulent ads on platforms like Facebook. A few weeks ago, the Journal de Montréal had an article demonstrating that with technological advances, there are false videos that seem very, very legit. Videos where you have the Prime Minister or the Premier or businessmen like Kevin O'Leary or international actors like Keanu Reeves saying, invest here, it's worth it. The person tries, invests a few dollars, withdraws, makes a profit, then tries with a few $1,000s, makes a profit, and then finally the retired person will empty their retirement account, and then poof, it disappears. In the Journal de Montréal article, we had 2 people who lost more than $100,000 in this type of scam. Public affairs programs like Enquête at Radio-Canada had talked about a case where a person had lost more than $400,000. So savings emptied from one day to the next. What should be done
De fraude ne se reproduit.
for each different type of actor for this type of fraud to never happen again?
That is it's a very complex type of scam or fraud that happens. It leverages people's, I need to make money or an opportunity. So, and then it, involves deep fake technology and what have you. So one of the challenges is having a holistic approach to this. On one hand, prevention and awareness, trying to make sure people understand, that these types of scams are out there and how to protect themselves, trying to disrupt these type of opportunities. There are ads out there. There are websites that advertise this. So at the CAFC and working with our police partners, we try and disrupt those and get them taken down. And then on the investigative side. So the role of our center is often have that reporting come to us from different victims. We then can connect the different linkages and work with different police partners to pursue those people behind them. And often it's international involved because those behind it are operating in another country. So we have to have this really holistic approach across a bunch of different avenues to tackle that.
OK, merci. Souvent, les fraudeurs sont, comme vous l'avez dit, à l'étranger.
Thank you. Often scammers are abroad, and the public affairs programs I mentioned said that often it's done in very poor countries, and that often the people who commit these frauds are threatened by organized groups who blackmail them by saying, you work for us, you do this, and you need to bring back some money. How does the RCMP work internationally to dismantle these networks?
C'est une question.
Absolutely. It's a great challenge for victims and at the same time for the RCMP. Trying to fight against overseas fraud. First of all, we've used our liaison officer network in other countries. And furthermore, there are some regional organizations like Europol.
Dans cet centre qui s'appelle...
The RCMP has a few officers in the center, which is called Joint Cybercrime Action Task Force. And thanks to these centers, international police services can exchange information in real time. So that's just one approach, one example of how the RCMP fights these overseas fraud.
C'est avec toutes les fuites de données qu'il y a eu dans les diverses institutions.
Another kind of fraud is that with everything that's happened in the institutions is that the fraudsters go to the person's house, the ones that they're aiming at, by saying, oh, your account has been frauded, give us your debit card. And the people might arrive with clothing and identification that look like police officers' clothing. And what can we do to prevent that? And is there something that we can do to also fight all of the data leaks in so many different businesses?
I'll start with your first question or example of the fraud of where usually some sort of emergency type scam where they say, I need to come to your house and pick up money or something like that. It is absolutely happening. It often targets senior citizens. This is an area, and there's been lots of great investigations into this, but this is an area where prevention is absolutely key and awareness. We have found that when young people or family members talk to their seniors and say, I'm never going to call you out of the blue and say, I'm in jail somewhere and need $5,000, and sort of have that conversation, that is highly effective of them understanding and avoiding that kind of scam. So that's, again, an example of that in-person sort of person-to-person engagement is important. so, I mentioned that. And then into your second question about data leaks and what have you, unfortunately, a lot of the fraud that is perpetrated is from data that's stolen, that is then mined for people's identities, or ways that the fraudsters can use that to then change and launch fraud attacks against them. So that goes sort of the second half of my overall responsibilities of dealing with cybercrime, of trying to go after the cyber criminals who are hacking into systems to steal that data and leverage it for other ways. And we use the same approach. We do prevention. We work with as many partners as we can. We do disruption to go after that cybercrime ecosystem that is trying to steal that data.
Merci.
Merci, Monsieur Saint-Marie. Mr. Falk, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Lynham, for your testimony here today. I just want to follow up a little bit on Ms. O'Rourke's questions about Bill C-22. What specific tools in Bill C-22 would you think would better assist you in doing the job in preventing crime or scams?
In terms of how judicial authorizations work, obviously when police services need to legally obtain data to help them investigate and prove who's behind it, they have to seek data either from financial institutions, telecommunications providers, and what have you. Given how fast cyber and fraud moves, the quicker that law enforcement can get that data back, helps them advance those investigations faster. So I'll use an example of tools that allow police services to submit through the courts judicial authorization and then get that back data. Helps, we call move at the speed of cyber. So I'll use that. I'll give you that. That's the example I'll use as how those kind of tools or how kind of legislation of the C-22 type can help law enforcement.
Okay, and you don't think you have those tools today?
It's
just slower, requiring judicial authorization, right?
So, there have been some great. There has been legislation that's changed in terms of turnaround times when production orders have been submitted in like the financial information sphere. I just use that as an example of cyber and fraud is a type of crime that moves very quickly, and police to be able to go after the cyber criminals and the fraudsters, we need to be able to receive that legally obtained data quickly so we can analyze it, find the patterns, do the attribution, and what have you. So I just use an example of timely response to judicial authorizations is an important tool that police need.
Okay. It's said that only 5 to 10% of actual scams or frauds are reported to the police. And I'm sure that you do a cost benefit when someone reports being scammed or defrauded. Do you think it's worth your while to pursue a lot of these scams?
So I'm not, when you say cost benefit, are you talking?
Well, the amount of effort that you as the RCMP have
to
put into it, the investigative,
Right, so we take that approach. In that there are, and it's based on a few factors, including are there solid investigative leads or intelligence that can be followed up on? And if there are partners that want to work together, domestic, international, that may become a full criminal investigation. If those sort of leads aren't readily available, then it may be a disruptive type activity that's taken. At the same time, we're always doing prevention around the sides of learning from what happened and then going back and warning the people about the latest scam that's reported to us.
Okay, but when somebody reports a fraud to you and you look at it and you say, well, we're going to put all this effort into it, all these man hours, all the resources, in actually trying to get a conviction here. And then you go to the courts, and it's basically a slap on the wrist. I'm thinking of a woman this past March in Montreal who was defrauded of thousands of dollars. The perpetrators were sentenced to 18 months house arrest with generous carve-outs for going to the gym and things like that. And her comment was that she felt that the penalty is a joke. Do you, as the RCMP, also figure that there's not proper penalties for the crimes that are being committed? We
usually focus on that return on investment type activity of like what we think we can achieve from either a criminal prosecution or disruptive action. So we focus our efforts on those type of calculations to figure out, okay, how can we achieve the most reduction of fraud or cybercrime in Canada. So that's always part of our calculation. We tend to put our efforts in that area as well as prevention, rather than what the outcomes are at the other end.
And do you sometimes find that your officers or your personnel are frustrated with the penalty versus the actual crime and the effort involved in achieving a conviction?
The role of the Canadian Fraud Centre and National Cybercrime Coordination Unit, we're not the lead investigating agency. So we work with all the partners and usually a lead agency. So I can't speak to what an investigator who leads that investigation, and what happens at the end. But our main role is to bring those entities together, to enable them with intelligence and technology, and orient them in the best way possible to achieve the biggest result possible.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Falk. Mr. Ma, the floor will be yours for 5 minutes,
sir. Thank you, Mr. Leitnam, for being here. My first question is, could you describe how Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre coordinates with the financial institutions, the telecommunications provider, and law enforcement agencies and digital platforms in identifying and disrupting emerging frauds? In particular, is this a proactive prevention approach or a post-crime solving approach?
I'd say it's both, but primarily we aim on the proactive side. So as I mentioned in my opening remarks and one of the questions, we will either come across information of a website, an email address, a cryptocurrency wallet that is facilitating fraud, and then we will engage the financial institution, telecommunication provider, or have you to say, look, we think this violates your terms of service, and over to you if you're going to do something about that. And what we've increasingly done is try and do that at scale and almost in real time. I mentioned this Maple disruption operation that brought all those partners together in person to do that, and it created some real efficiencies of how we have to address that. At the same time, after, if there is a victim or, there's an investigation launched, law enforcement will work very closely with the financial institutions and telecommunications and other as part of that investigation. And the level of operational collaboration and that I've seen in it's increased significantly in the last few years.
Thank you. And so what are the biggest operational barriers to coordinating anti-fraud efforts across the sectors and jurisdictions? For example, is it data sharing that's been a problem, or is it jurisdictional fragmentation? Are these barriers international actors as well?
And those barriers or challenges, they exist domestically and internationally to a certain extent. There is still some challenges with data sharing amongst public, private sector, and what have you. A little bit is culturally as well, though, is just say, hey, am I going to take a little bit of risk to share this for the greater public good? But there's been great improvement there. You mentioned, sort of cross-jurisdictional. That is absolutely a challenge. A lot of how we approach things is still very geographically based, domestically, internationally. So that's where we need really strong coordination, and that's what my centers do day in, day out, is try and bring those parties together and figure out, how are we going to use police resources to the best to make the biggest reduction in terms of cybercrime and fraud.
Thank you. So we briefly touched on the recovering of funds and so forth. So how important is speed of information sharing between institutions and law enforcement in preventing additional victims or recovering the funds?
Speed is absolutely crucial. I talked about, there's a window that, in say an e-transfer, some kind of money transfer, that a window before that gets completely settled. At the same time, there are times where certain transactions they've already been settled, so they can't be recovered. But what I've seen in the last couple of years is, discussions between banks and telecommunications companies of how do we share that data to reduce further victimization, and then the stand-up of the Canadian Anti-Scam Coalition, which we are a member of, which is a great initiative of bringing all these parties together to figure out holistic ways to either share information or tackle this problem.
Yeah, thank you. We really appreciate you doing that. During the Fraud Prevention Month, the Centre emphasized the importance of bringing hidden crime into the spotlight. So why is fraud still significantly underreported in Canada, and how does the impact prevention efforts?
Great question. I mentioned we only think 5 to 10% of individuals report. There's a bunch of shame still associated with this. People think they've done something wrong. They're particularly in the senior community. They worry like they've lost significant money. So that shame piece. So we spend a lot of time trying to encourage people to say that like you are a victim here. And that's a lot of our message. I have highly trained folks who, when they talk to people on the phone, take that victim-centered approach. But there's more to be done on this. And public awareness campaigns continue to try and encourage reporting. And just to finish off, I mentioned in my remarks we've launched a new public reporting site. We still receive phone calls over the phone, but the new site, we're now receiving 2.5 times the previous online reports we were before. So we're making some progress on the reporting side.
I'm very glad to hear. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ma. OK, comme j'ai mentionné au début, je dois réduire le...
Like I said at the beginning, I'm unfortunately going to have to reduce the time. So Mr. Saint-Marie, 1 minute, followed by Madam Cronus, 2 minutes 35. And then Madam Begum, 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Mr. Saint-Marie, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Lyman, I'd like to have your opinion about the civil responsibility. If somebody has been frauded and they have a reasonable belief to think that the platform was negligent, should they be held responsible according to you? Because we are talking about crime. So according to you, to what percentage of the publicity being fraud, at what point should they be designated as a criminal platform?
I'm not well placed to give civil legal advice on whether there is a civil liability matter between a person using a platform, what have you. As I said today and what have you, is like the digital platforms absolutely have a role in making sure that they receive information from us quickly, that they send us information, and that they look for stuff on their platforms. And I think there's still a lot to do on that front.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Merci, Monsieur Saint-Marie.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Try and do this at the speed of cyber. You talked about the need for prevention and described telecoms and banks and financial institutions. I'd say, is it fair to say that they're supportive and responsive, but largely reactive?
On the prevention side?
Yeah.
On
the responding side when a scam is happening.
I'm not sure I fully
Okay, so let me ask this: is there anything that stops a scam or a text call from getting through?
There absolutely is, on both the telecommunications side, and if there are other ways of who owns that sort of chain to interrupt it, that is happening every day. It just needs we need to do more of it, and we need to figure out the frameworks to increase that. And
is it happening through voluntary action, or is it happening through regulation?
I'm not well placed for if it's, say, a question on the telecommunications side of how that's being whether regulated or voluntary. I know from the interactions we have with those sectors, they absolutely want to do more with reducing cybercrime and fraud.
Do you know of anything that actually requires telecom companies to either, report how much scam traffic is going on in real time or is moving through their networks?
None of that, but I know they have protocols like the shaken and stirred protocol about verifying calls to make sure that's a legitimate call coming through there. But I don't know the broader to the first part of your question. No.
But there are gaps.
There is absolutely more work to do about trying to prevent that solicitation scam getting to Canadians. Absolutely.
And so, do you have any recommendations on what the federal government can do using our telecommunications power to take positive and concrete action that we're not already currently doing?
I have some decent visibility on how the telcos operate and, the framework, but I'm not an expert in telecommunications regulation to give you an informed answer, unfortunately.
Well, in that case, could you use just the last few seconds that we
Sure.
have together to give some advice to the folks in my riding who are scared about this happening? And what are the warning signs, and what should they do first?
Yeah, and I will make it really easy. We use the take 5. Take 5 minutes to try and think and reflect before doing anything. And then we break it down into the 3 R's. Recognize, reject, and report. And it's sort of like that, from my generation of stop, drop, and roll. Those kind of we've got to have that kind of mentality of very simple terminology to encourage people. Just take 5 minutes, and that will avoid most of the scams.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Cronus. Okay, Ms. Begum, 2.5 minutes to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you so much, DG Liam, for being here. I also will try my best to go at the speed of light or cyber light, I guess. One of the things that over the last, decade we heard from, especially seniors, was the door-to-door scams that took place, and whether it was get your water heater or some sort of something in your house, and then they ended up with a $15,000, $20,000 lien on their home, and till this day, I know there are seniors who haven't really recovered that and have had to pay or couldn't sell their properties because of that. So my first question is, are there mechanism or is there something that we can do in terms of supporting those who have been victims to that? And because I have a little time, I want to ask my second question, which is, in reflection of that, I feel that now youth are sort of coming across similar types of crime, which is not door to door, but it's rather on their phones, where they, get a message from something like Starbucks that asks for, a free coffee, for example. You're offered a free coffee, and you click I agree. And I was watching or listening to a data scientist named Bushra Ahmed, who spoke recently at a talk where she talked about the hidden cost of I agree, of clicking I agree. And it's basically the future of AI and what's happening and how your data is shared widely and what that means. If you could speak to what can we do to support youth in going forward for the next decades, and how we don't end up in a situation like that as well. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I'll come at it from 2 angles. I'll come at it from maybe kind of the first part of your question. A lot of seniors sometimes fall victim to these door-and-door, what have you, is guess who's really good at encouraging or educating senior citizens about fraud and cybercrime? Other seniors. So we actually operate a program of volunteers, of senior citizens that we train up, and they go out and give in-person presentations. Sometimes we actually get them on the phone and talk to a victim and say, here's how you don't fall victim again, or in some cases, you're in a scam and you should cease and desist. So I go back to that tailoring the prevention campaigns for the audience, and then on the youth. Really, and how I think we really need to help youth is it's got to be a societal approach. It's got to be in schools. We have to engage them online. That's where they are to a certain extent. And then parents, parents absolutely have to have conversations with their children about you recognize a scam, or you know the dangers if you send intimate photos, please do not engage in this type of activity. It will ruin your life. So I use that example of there's going to be not one way from the prevention side, and it's got to be tailored to the specific audiences.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, Mr. Lennon, really appreciate you being here today. Thank you for the ongoing work of yourself and the RCMP and doing everything that you can to assist in putting an end to and mitigating the risks associated with all of this. And we certainly look forward to any further input that the agency may have in terms of public policy development on the part of the federal government. Colleagues, I'm going to suspend briefly as we turn over. I will just let you know so that the parties can discuss this in advance. We will not have time for the third questioner in the next hour. So that means there will be 2 from the Conservative side, 2 from the Liberal side. Monsieur Saint-Mary's will be reduced. So I will let you spend the next few minutes deciding how you want to order your affairs. Again, Mr. Lynham, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and briefly suspended. witnesses joining us, one in person, one online. From the Canadian Association of Retired Persons, joining virtually, we have Anthony Quinn, who serves as the president of the organization. Welcome, Mr. Quinn. And here in the room with us from Wealth Simple is Colin Smith, who is the vice president of Risk and Decision Science. Gentlemen, you will have upwards of 5 minutes for your introductory remarks, followed by questions and answers from the recognized political parties around the table. Mr. Quinn, I'm going to start with you. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Mr. Chair and members of the committee, thank you for the invitation to appear today. My name is Anthony Quinn, and I'm the president of CARP, the Canadian Association of Retired Persons. We represent more than 250,000 members across Canada and advocate on issues affecting older Canadians, including financial security, health care, and freedom from age discrimination. For older Canadians, fraud can be a life-altering event. When a senior loses money to a scam, they are often losing retirement savings accumulated over decades. The unique peril for seniors victims is that they may have little or no opportunity to return to the workforce to earn that money back. For the vast majority of older Canadians, the consequences of fraud are permanent. CARP recently surveyed our members, and over 8,000 respondents replied. More than 82% reported that they had been targeted by a scam, and nearly 1 in 5 reported having lost money to fraud. All available and reliable sources tell us that only between 5 and 10% of frauds are reported. We therefore believe the true scale of the problem is significantly larger than even our own polling reveals. For the last decade or more, Canadians have been told to be more careful, and seniors have heeded that message. They have attended seminars, watched public service announcements, read bank brochures, and learned to be skeptical of unsolicited text, calls, and emails. Banks, telecom companies, digital platforms, governments, and advocacy organizations like our own have encouraged Canadians to remain vigilant. Yet, fraud losses continue to rise. At some point, Parliament must ask whether the burden of prevention has been placed too heavily on victims and too lightly on the institutions through which these scams are delivered. From the perspective of an older Canadian who has lost a lifetime of savings, educational programs, corporate platitudes, public relations campaigns, and reminders to be careful are not enough. Our message to this committee is that fraud prevention must become a system responsibility, not merely an individual responsibility. That means telecom providers must do more to authenticate calls, prevent spoofing, and block fraudulent texts before they reach Canadians. Digital platforms must also take greater responsibility for fraudulent advertisements, impersonation accounts, fake investment promotions, and other scams distributed through their systems. And perhaps most importantly, financial institutions must strengthen their fraud detection and intervention before the money leaves the customer's accounts. In this case, Parliament should be asking whether the incentives for prevention are properly aligned. Mr. Chair, let me give you just one example from a CARP member. Peter Squire is a 70-year-old retired market analyst from Winnipeg. He was not inexperienced or financially unsophisticated. Mr. Squire received what appeared to be a legitimate call from a senior investment professional. The documents sent to him carried banking branding. The phone number appeared legitimate. The proposal looked legitimate, and he sought assistance from established financial institutions and proceeded with what he thought was a secure financial investment. Instead, nearly $650,000 of his retirement savings disappeared in a sophisticated fraud. What struck me about Peter's story is that he did many of the things we tell Canadians to do. He asked questions, he dealt with recognized institutions, he sought professional assistance, yet he still became a victim. That's why CARP believes fraud prevention cannot rest primarily on individual vigilance. The systems through which these scams are delivered must do more to prevent them from succeeding in the first place. Mr. Chair, there's another contrast that many seniors find difficult to understand. When approximately $20 million in gold was stolen from Toronto Pearson Airport, there was an immediate all-hand-on-deck response. Police agencies mobilized, federal authorities became involved, insurance companies activated recovery efforts, Security experts were deployed, international investigations were resourced and engaged. Canadian authorities worked with police agencies and partners in the United States, India, and other countries. The story dominated national headlines, resources were marshaled, accountability was demanded, and recovery became a priority. But when a senior loses $650,000 in retirement savings to a fraud, the response can feel very different. The victim is often told to call their bank, then the police, then the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre, and although they are met with sympathy, the typical response is sorry, but there's not much we can do to help. So seniors in Canada are asking, why does Canada appear to be capable of mounting a coordinated national and international response when institutional assets are stolen, but when ordinary Canadians lose billions in the aggregate, not much happens? From the victim's perspective, their consequences are far more devastating. When institutions bear the cost of a loss, they tend to act in a more coordinated and more international response. CARP believes the system deserves prevention, accountability, and consumer protection are built into the infrastructure itself rather than relying primarily on individual vigilance. I would also note that CARP is engaged in a separate but related initiative concerning competition, transparency, and the quality of investment advice available to Canadians through bank branch investment channels. Over the past year, we have raised these concerns directly with banks, regulators, the Competition Bureau, and officials in the Department of Finance. While we have appreciated the constructive dialogue we've had with the Ministry of Finance's office, while distinct from today's discussion on frauds and scams, the underlying principle is similar. Canadians must have confidence that the financial system is working in their interests, that conflicts are properly managed, and that consumers receive fair treatment and meaningful protection. Mr. Chair, after a decade of rising fraud, increasing losses, and missed opportunities to act, Canadian seniors are asking for protection and accountability. And they are asking financial and communication systems that are working hard to prevent fraud against consumers as it does to prevent losses in the institutions themselves. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Quinn. Mr. Smith, the floor will be yours for upwards of 5 minutes, sir.
Great. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the members of the committee for the invitation today. Wealthsimple is Canada's leading financial innovator. We are trusted by more than 4 million Canadians and hold over $150 billion in assets. Protecting the trust that Canadians place in us is central to what we do. So what does fraud look like today? We've spent years hardening our systems against direct attack, but fraud has increasingly moved from attacking those systems to attacking the people using them. And clients of all financial institutions find themselves on the front line. The most damaging attacks are also the hardest to detect, because the fraudster never touches our systems at all. Instead, they get the client to move the money themselves, often while the client believes they're being helped. The tactics are old, but what's new is the speed. With AI, a fraudster can clone a familiar voice or forge a convincing document using tools anyone can download, collapsing what used to take weeks into minutes. This has changed how we fight fraud. We've come to believe that prevention works best when technology and people work together. Everything we do behind the scenes to detect fraud paired with real tools that let clients take part. A passkey, for example, is a simpler, safer way to sign into your account using your device's biometrics or PIN. Unlike traditional passwords, passkeys are uniquely tied to your personal device and to Wealthsimple, meaning that they won't work on fake or fraudulent websites. When we launched passkeys in the first quarter of this year, our clients immediately moved to protect more than $10 billion behind them. Another new tool is trusted places. Clients can mark locations like home or work as trusted, and moving money from anywhere else triggers extra verification on terms that they set. More than 500,000 of our clients' transactions have already been verified in this way. We also protect clients by reaching them in real time. If someone is moving money in our app while on a phone call, we show a warning that the call is not from us. When a client appears to be a victim of a scam, a specially trained team we call our Spellbreakers group reaches out to talk to them before the money is gone. So financial institutions and clients can work together to fight fraud, but most fraud originates outside of the financial system. And preventing it must be a shared responsibility across financial institutions, telecom providers, and social media platforms, especially as AI accelerates these scams. Many fraud attempts against our clients begin on social media, where scammers use our name and logo to run fraudulent ads that pull Canadians into scams like pump and dump investment schemes. Between October 2025 and January 2026, we reported more than 10,000 such ads on Meta platforms. During this period, it took an average of 4 days for these ads to be removed after reporting them to Meta. More recently, we caught and reported as many as 1,500 fraudulent ads in a single day. What we do what we can to protect our clients from these scams. We've built an AI-powered system to identify potential pump and dump stocks in real time and automatically warn clients who might be about to buy in. But reporting ads one by one is a losing game. We have yet to see a platform level or policy solution from Meta to address this issue. The lasting solution is to require social media companies to verify that every advertiser of financial services is a legitimate, regulated entity, as the US, the UK, Australia, Hong Kong, and 6 other countries already do today. That is the central recommendation in our submission to the government's national anti-fraud strategy. We welcome the government and this committee's focus on protecting Canadians. Fraud is not going to slow down. What gives me confidence is that our clients have shown that they want to be active partners in their own protection, and that partnership is how we will keep Canadians safe. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Smith. I'm going to take the rare opportunity off the top to ask a question just because you piqued my interest on something that came up earlier this week in testimony. How many days did you say it took Meta to take down a fraudulent ad that you had flagged for them?
During that period, it was an average of 4 days.
And did Meta acknowledge that it was a fraud at the outset, or was their rationale that they were uncertain as to whether or not it was fraudulent?
So we would submit them for review, and that review process, which they do internally to determine whether or not the ads are scams, took that amount of time to complete.
Okay, I'm sure other members will follow up on this. If they don't, I may return with some questions at the very end. With that, Ms. Borelli, the floor is yours for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome to our witnesses. Thank you for being here for this important study. My first question is for Mr. Quinn. Mr. Quinn, many seniors are targeted through fake tech support scams or bank impersonation scams where the victim is convinced to install remote access software. And once that happens, the scammer may be able to guide them to divest of all their life savings. Should banks or payment platforms be required to add extra verifications on temporary holds when high-risk payments are attempted from a device showing symptoms of remote access?
Thank you for the question. I do believe that the banks must take a higher level of responsibility for those losses. There is no scams taking place where they are typically taking cash from an individual out of their hand. The scammers are required to use the systems electronically that are owned and operated by the banks, and the money is transferred from one institution typically to another using their systems. So our members believe that there is a greater responsibility must be placed on the institutions themselves, and without that, education alone, despite the efforts of across the board, will not be enough to prevent the frauds and scams from taking place, and there's no opportunity for recoup.
One challenge that seniors is that seniors need protection from fraud, but they should not be treated as incapable of managing their own money. Any solution has to protect independence while stopping high-risk manipulation. What kinds of safeguards would your members accept? For example, trusted contacts, optional transaction limits, delays for unusual transfers, or anything of the like?
We're always concerned about a paternalistic attitude towards older adults and the sense of taking away their ability to control their own financial decisions. We have to balance that with the pressure that fraudsters use to encourage the victims to act hastily, to act on a limited time offer, or in presenting the case of an emergency situation like the grandparent scam, where their grandchild is in some kind of criminal or health-related concern. I believe our members would rightly give up a little bit of that control with some delay in the transfer if that meant they were being protected by the banks and they were able to ensure that the transfer was legitimate.
I think there should be one clear front door for senior fraud victims with banks, platforms, telecoms, police, like a hub that they can go to once they've been divested of funds?
Well, right now, the process, and we heard from the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre, when we speak to the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre, they say they're not able to answer the majority of the phone calls coming in, and they're directing those who have been scammed to fill out online forms. So they've been scammed online. They try to get some kind of attention from the RCMP and other police forces, and they're told to file a form online. So we need some type of immediate action from the banks if they're able to recover, but ensuring that the banks are trying to prevent the frauds at the front end is far more important than having a place for seniors to report after they've had their money stolen. The case right now is that it's too late and everyone expresses their regret at the loss, and there's a sense that the system isn't really there to protect them.
Previous hour, we spoke with Chris Lindnam, the Canadian of the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre, and he advised of a program that they have where seniors are helping seniors. Do you know of that program, and have you seen it work successfully at all?
That is just one of likely thousands of fraud prevention programs going on across the country. The point that we're trying to make today is that education is only a small part of the problem, and it has proven not to be effective. Even those who have heard the messaging are still falling for the frauds, and we need the institutions to play a greater role in protecting seniors from these frauds.
I get a lot of inquiries. I get a lot of emails and calls from seniors who have fallen victim to some of these fraudsters. Where's my best place to send them? How can I help them?
I wish I knew, Madam, and I would say that we're asking Parliament to take a lead on this, to encourage and perhaps require the institutions to play a greater role, to invest in enforcement, and to increase the penalties and punishments in our country so that fraudsters will be less inclined to participate.
What is your biggest ask? What do you want the most from government?
My biggest ask is that the institutions, particularly the banks and the telecoms, are held to a higher degree of accountability in this, and that they be part of the solution to preventing the frauds. And I believe that if they were on the hook for some of these losses, they would be more likely to take action. Thank you.
Very much, Ms. Borelli. Okay, I believe we're going to have Ms. Lapointe splitting some time with Mr. Baines. I'll let the two of you, Mr. Fanjoy, rather. I'll let the two of you sort that out. But for now, the floor is yours for 6 minutes, Mr. Fanjoy.
Yes, I am splitting my time. Really pleased.
Sorry, just Mr. Fanjoy, we've got the wrong microphone on, so if you can just push. There we go.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. I'm really pleased to see the Canadian Association of Retired Persons present. I'm sure everyone around this table has members of their own family that are getting older and vulnerable to sophisticated financial crimes, and we all share a desire to protect them while respecting their independence and agency. I'd be interested in your thoughts on how we strike that balance and make sure that we don't take away their independence, but actively protect them, recognizing that some of our seniors are maybe dealing with undiagnosed dementia, which would make them especially vulnerable.
Thank you very much. The fraudsters are using more and more powerful psychological tricks and efforts to convince Canadians to fall for these scams. It's not necessarily related to cognitive issues, but more likely to someone's perhaps exaggerated sense of awareness in themselves and their ability to interpret these financial decisions. I think we have to look to international jurisdictions where they have put more effort into protecting beyond education, and look to the US, the UK, and really encourage, and again to the parliamentarians, to perhaps require these institutions, particularly the banks and the telcos, to play a greater role in the protection of Canadians, and seniors being the largest number and losing the most money, and to, I think, put into their requirements that if they are not making these provisions and protections and putting them in place to prevent the frauds, that they will be responsible for the financial losses. And if they, I think, are put in that position, they will be more likely and more incentivized to increase the protections and protect Canadians.
Time, I will pass to Mr. Baines.
Thank you, Mr. Fanjoy, and thank you to our witness for joining us. I'm going to try to quickly get into this because, Mr. Quinn, I'm from Richmond, British Columbia. We have it has the longest life expectancy in Canada and has a lot of seniors that live here. If you can speak to specific gaps, I know you've talked about telecoms. We've heard from previous witnesses today about the sophistication behind the fraud, scam compounds. You've talked about the emotional side, about how clever the fraudsters are becoming. We've also heard previously about loneliness, that they target people that are lonely. And if you can maybe provide some specific gaps that you may be able to provide recommendations for our financial crime agency moving forward, and are you participating in submissions for the financial crime agency? Also, telecoms provide alerts. If there's a potential call that appears to be a scam call, are there more, or do you wish that there were some alerts that were available in the banking system in some ways?
Yeah, thank you. I think all of the above, sir. The idea that banks and telecoms are not doing anything is not what I'm trying to get across, but there is certainly room for more. We see on our phones the alerts indicating that this may be a scam call, but many calls are still getting through. On the social media side, as my colleague from Wealthsimple mentioned, there are literally a deluge of fake and phony ads on social media where seniors are gathering for much of their information and their digital life. So when it comes to gaps, I think my answer would be that we would like the parliamentarians to really take an aggressive approach to regulating the institutions through the CRTC and the control you have over the financial institutions, and require them to play a greater role. We cannot ask the victims, seniors, younger Canadians, to be experts in all of these developing fields, but we should be requiring these large national, almost with no competitors, and earning billions of dollars a year in revenue from Canadians, to be true partners in protecting us from the fraudsters.
Thank you. I believe that's my time. Thank
you. Mr. Fanjoy and Mr. Baines. Monsieur Saint-Marie, c'est à vous pour 6 minutes.
Oui, merci, monsieur. Mr. Saint-Marie, 5 minutes. Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to both witnesses for their presence. My first question is for Mr. Smith.
Impose aux plateformes numériques.
You mentioned that other countries require companies like Meta to verify the authenticity of companies offering financial services through their ads. And you're requesting that this be done here also, is that right?
Yes, that's correct. You can see listed on Meta's website the list of countries that require additional verification for any advertisements in a number of industries, including financial services. And this is something that Meta has the technical capability to do, but chooses not to do in Canada.
Wow. Les autres pays qui ont ces vérifications plus sévères-là.
Wow. Other countries with these more stringent verifications, has these types of fraud declined?
That is my general understanding, yes. I'm not necessarily an expert in all the stats in other countries, but definitely this verification step is important. In the context of what we've seen impersonating Wealthsimple, it's been as egregious as deep fakes of our CEO pitching stocks to Canadians. So clearly fraudulent material using our brand.
Oui, c'est vraiment préoccupant. Merci beaucoup. Est-ce que vous savez...
That's really concerning. Thank you very much. Do you know why Meta does not impose these additional verifications in Canada? In Canada, did it have to go through a legislative or regulatory process that the government has not yet initiated here? And
qu'il s'agit d'une forme de...
do you consider that the fact that it's not yet implemented here, is that a form of laxism on the part of the digital platforms?
Yeah, I believe a big part of why they haven't done them here would be because it's just extra friction in the process of putting ads on the platform. And I do think that it's a spot where the government could step in.
Je vous remercie beaucoup. Mes prochaines questions vont être pour M. Quinn.
Thank you very much. The next few questions are for Mr. Quinn. Thank you for your presence. We've heard too many horror stories like the one you've referred to, where elderly people's life savings are liquidated without anything being done. That needs to change. There are many cases here in Quebec with programs laying out the strategies these fraudsters have used. Things are moving along slowly. And I liked what you said about holding telecoms and financial institutions, as well as digital platforms responsible. With this in mind, I would like to have your opinion on civil responsibility. If someone was defrauded and has reasonable motives for believing that the platform was negligent in, for example, allowing an ad to be shown, should the platform be held co-responsible?
I don't think I could argue against that, sir. The idea that we have gotten into the situation in Canada where we are blaming the victims for not educating themselves, for not having been aware enough. And I believe we have to turn the tables to protect Canadians. And if this means holding accountable the platforms themselves, the telecoms, the digital service providers, or the financial institutions, I would not think our members would disagree with that.
Parce qu'évidemment, on parle de crimes ici.
Thank you. Of course, we're talking about crimes here. These thefts are criminal. Earlier this week, Meta told us that they were carrying out many efforts to reduce fraudulent ads, even though there's apparently a 4-day delay to get rid of these ads. While these platforms are flooded with such ads, we were told that perhaps 10% of ads are on Meta are of a fraudulent nature. According to you, what percentage of fraudulent ads should a company be designated as a criminal organization?
it'd be hard for me to speak to what percentage, but when we know the funnel through which the majority of these crimes are being perpetrated is Meta and similar organizations, I think we have to hold them to a higher standard and require them to be part of the solution and not allow them to continue to be the funnel through which these international or domestic criminals are working.
Monsieur le Président, avec les 10 secondes qui me restent.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. With 10 seconds left over, I'll give you back the mic. Thank you very much.
Merci, comme toujours.
You still had 15 seconds, but as always, thank you so much, Mr. Saint-Marie, for your generosity.
I'm going to ask you a few questions. I thought you put it really well when you said that the system has moved from attacking the people, attacking the people that the system has moved to attacking the people who are using the systems as opposed to attacking the systems and actually getting the clients to move money. And of course, the big challenge with that is that it's happening at the speed of cyber. There has been a huge focus on trying to get data after the fact, but prevention at this point is largely reactive. Is that fair?
I think the way that we've been tackling this at Wealthsimple is to think about putting security features more directly in the client experience in our application so that it's part of how our clients interact with Wealthsimple, not just the behind-the-scenes fraud rules and models that we run. So,
of course, the hard part for you is that the financial institutions really are the face of this. When someone finds out they've been scammed, the first place that they have to call is the financial institution. And so, in many investment scams, once the money's sent, especially if it's sent through crypto or some kind of offshore platform, recovery is virtually impossible. Is that correct?
That's generally true. We do attempt recovery on behalf of our clients in fraud cases, but there can absolutely be challenges in doing so.
And from a systems perspective, you do try to do some proactive things, but from a legislative perspective, the system's still really dependent on the victim spotting the fraud and reporting it after the fact. Is that fair?
I don't think that's entirely fair. I think we take a lot of proactive measures on behalf of our clients, whether that's placing warnings in-app if we see something that seems suspicious for a client before they do a transaction. For example, if we have a client that is attempting to move money in crypto for the first time, there's a non-dismissible breather screen that goes up warning about the typical types of scams that happen on crypto that they have to accept to move past. So we're definitely thinking about how we are more proactive despite the legislation that you mentioned.
That's really helpful to know. But when it comes to things like, when it comes to things like fake investment ads, do you have any way to, as a financial institution, to police those? Other than through your own having someone sit there and behave like a user?
Well, as far as the ads themselves, we report these ads daily. It's an incredibly manual and time-intensive process where we scan for new ads using our trademark or our brand name, and we report them to the social media platforms. And then we've had to then build a lot of a more sophisticated infrastructure on the back end. Since we can't prevent the ads from showing up, what we've actually tried to do is where we do have control is in seeing which clients are making which investments on our platform and how are those stocks being talked about, either on social media or in the news. And combining those different signals together, we are able to place warnings to clients before they buy into something like a potential scam.
And when you talk about the things that you can control, is there anyone who has control over those fraudulent ads and whether or not they're going to appear? Is there like, are the telcos, who is in the best place to be able to prevent that?
I mean, that would be the social media platforms.
And in what what do you think the most effective way would be for us using our federal telecommunications power to be able to bring all the parties together and in a compulsory way address some of the issues that, that Mr. Quinn's brought up and some of the things that you're seeing in terms of the losses?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, requiring the social media platforms to verify that all advertisers of financial services are legitimate and are verified advertisers would go a long way. So what we see is that these ads are spun up by tons of many different accounts very, very rapidly, all of which are using something like Wealthsimple's logo or brand name, but not associated with us in any way.
We do see the government moving in a number of different bills that sometimes are hard to follow to try and deal with some of the things online. Is there anything in any current legislation that really helps get at the heart of this problem?
Not that I'm aware of.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Cronus. Madame O'Rourke, I believe you intend to split a little bit of your time with Mr. Ma. Let the two of you sort that out. The floor is yours between the two of you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Carr. Mr. Smith, it is terrific to hear about your Spellbreakers group and your proactive measures. I want to circle back. You said you identified 1,500 fraudulent investment ads in one day on the same platform, reported it, and it takes on average 4 days to take those down, right? It's stunning because Meta can block any news story from being posted at all. So it's quite shocking for this committee to hear. But you're a regulated, legitimate fintech. You are digital first. So I'm guessing you have to prove you're a legitimate platform in order to advertise there. What should be the threshold for advertisers to prove that they're legitimate?
I think the threshold should be the same as you think about other verified ads on other platforms, which is that for any advertising platform, you know who's paying for the ad. And that should be the same as the brand name that's featured in the ads, particularly in places like financial services.
So for an industrial-sized company like that, they should have the tools to do that.
And they do this in other jurisdictions, yes.
That's beautiful. Thank you. I'll cede my time to Mr. Ma.
Thank you very much, Chair. Mr. Smith, you talked about earlier, the platforms needing to verify ads, and you also just mentioned about the payment is one way of doing it. So why do you think platforms such as Meta takes 4 days to take it down when they could take down news articles within, in an hour or so?
I mean, I guess I would be speculating that it's because they make money on these ads. And, that's, like anything in this space, you have to balance that.
Thank you. My next question is for Mr. Quinn. You talked about earlier in your opening remarks that FIs financial institutions should do more in fraud prevention. Can you also speak to then what about these social media platforms and what role they should be playing more of to help prevent frauds?
The focus that I put on financial institutions was specifically because that is the means through which the money is being transferred. The introduction to the scam is perhaps happening through a Facebook ad where someone is posing as Wealthsimple or as the Prime Minister, touting a too good to be true investment opportunity. But it's when the financial transaction is occurring, the money is being taken out of that individual, in our member's case, out of that senior's bank account with a trusted financial institution, and their resources are being utilized to move that money. So that's why I was focused more on the financial institutions rather than the advertisers or the purporters of the message. But we have no less concern about that as we do with the financial institutions.
And along that line, then, can you speak to the importance of public awareness, as we heard earlier from the RCMP, in terms of combating financial fraud and scams, and especially for seniors and retired people?
There's no doubt that awareness and education is important, and likely the easiest to accomplish. And that's why Canada has relied primarily on education over the last decade. Frauds and scams have been continuing to increase even as education has increased. So CARP believes that now we have to focus on the financial institutions and the telcos and hold them to a higher degree of responsibility and ensure that they are doing everything in their power, hopefully with the pressure of Parliament, to protect Canadians from frauds and scams.
And along that line, then, CARP had sent a letter to the government in which you advocated for enhanced federal coordination and enforcement capacity, in addition to stronger actions to hold banks accountable. So, Mr. Quinn, how do the upcoming measures to fight financial fraud, such as the anti-fraud strategy, Bank Act amendments, and demonstrate the meaningful progress in protecting seniors and retired people from financial fraud and scams?
I would say those provide great signals that the government is starting to pay attention and take action, but we have yet to see the fruit of many of those natal programs and programs. So I would like those to have greater strength in prosecution. Many of the criminals are hiding behind the theft under $5,000 or other slap on the wrist crimes and still stealing millions of dollars annually. And we think criminal, along with institutional protections, are two things that CARP is asking the government to take action on. And the third I would add is just the inability of police to go cross jurisdictions in chasing these criminals domestically. We know how difficult it is to go across international borders, but even within Canada, police and victims are reporting to us that a criminal in Vancouver stealing from a victim in St. John, and the police aren't able to take action despite knowing who, where, and why the crime took place.
Thanks, Mr. Ma. OK, Monsieur Saint-Marie, je te donne 1 minute ici, 1 minute 30 secondes.
1 minute, Mr. St. Marie. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. One question for Mr. Smith. Right now, in the case of fraud, if there's a transaction that has been not authorized, it is the financial institution that has to pay. My question has to do with open banking. Isn't there a risk that the financial institution and the exchange platform be able to blame each other mutually when fintech cannot pay? So how can we make sure that the consumer not be the loser in this game?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think that in the world of open banking, we will see a lot of benefits in consumers being able to more freely share their information across institutions than we see today with bank linking and other methods, which in some instances can make account security more challenging. I don't think, in my view, that there would be a risk of changing liability or payments in the case of fraud, as you're asking. I think that we would expect that to stay largely the same, and that all of the regulated financial institutions that would be a part of open banking would continue to meet the same obligations there.
On pourrait en discuter à un autre moment. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
We'll be able to talk about this another time. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. St. Marie.
One to you, Mr. Smith. It's been referenced now a number of times throughout this meeting as a result of your introductory remarks about the delay in relation to Meta's response once fraud has been flagged on your organization's part. Are you able to publicly share with us the contents of any conversations you've had with similar financial bodies who have experienced the same type of delay in that type of fraudulent instance?
I think we could take that away and follow up in writing with some of similar conversations. But yes, certainly something we've discussed within the industry.
I appreciate that. I would encourage you, where reasonable, to perhaps congregate with some of your colleagues who hold similar roles to have a conversation about what their experiences have been, and if you see fit, to provide this committee with a more sophisticated and detailed report about what your collective experience with Facebook specifically has been in relation to this. We'd appreciate that. My final question will be for you, Mr. Quinn, again, in relation to Meta. Are your members discussing with you what their experiences have been when a fraud has occurred on Facebook? Are they reaching out to Facebook? Is Facebook reaching out to them to say, we want to inform you that you may have been or are currently the victim of fraud? Are they writing your members into Facebook and asking for support or guidance? And if so, are they receiving any type of correspondence in return? Can you just paint a brief picture for us, please, about what the relationship between senior citizens in Canada and Facebook looks like from your perspective when it comes to fraudulent activity that originates and exists on their platforms? Thank you, Mr. Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have seen no proactive efforts on behalf of Facebook or Meta in communicating with seniors. The majority of our members who are interacting with us are interacting through Facebook. Every post that we put onto Facebook is targeted by scammers because they know seniors are congregating on our Facebook page, and the frauds flow directly after our posts and the conversation that our members are having. Everything from the romance scams to financial opportunities to job offers, all scams, all immediately flooding into our members' conversations. So I have no faith that Facebook or Meta are being proactive in protecting seniors in Canada.
My last follow-up there would be, do you see value in using the testimony you've provided today alongside that of Mr. Smith and the questions you've received from committee members in actually posting something from your organization on Facebook in the next week or so, asking Facebook to elevate, using its very sophisticated algorithms and capabilities to do so, that message, and to challenge them to see if they would be willing to do so? Is that something you might entertain?
Certainly would entertain that, Mr. Chair. I would look for the support of your kind offices and perhaps some experts. We are not the tech experts on this side, but anything we can do to engage with Facebook and to encourage them to take proactive action would be welcome, and we'd be happy to participate.
On behalf of any other members around this table, but if I see that CARP has posted in the next few days or weeks anything in relation to a direct call on Facebook to be more accountable to the fraud that's occurring on its platform, and that you and your membership are driving a call to action, I, for one, would be honored and pleased to use my social media networks to elevate that message. On that note, Mr. Smith, Mr. Quinn, thank you very much for being here today. You've helped us generate a better understanding of the scope of the problem that we are facing. It's quite devastating to continue hearing these stories, particularly the most tragic of which involve the destruction of the life of an individual who's worked for decades to build a nest egg for themselves and their families to enjoy the time that they have left here in our country. And we will do what we can to take action, and your guidance assists us very much in doing that. So with that, thank you, gentlemen. Members, just a very brief reminder. Next week, Minister Solomon is here on Monday in relation to our AI strategy, and on Tuesday we will finalize the mold makers report that we have been working on, I hope, and we will have the last couple of hours worth of testimony in relation to this study. With that, I wish everybody a great rest of the week and weekend. Meeting adjourned.